Welcome to Stop Overthinking, the podcast for overthinkers, people pleasers, and perfectionists who want to feel calm and confident enough to handle whatever life sends your way. I'm your host, Kristen, a women's life and mindset coach, lifelong educator, and recovering perfectionist. Hey y'all, welcome back to the Stop Overthinking podcast. How are you doing today? I can't believe there's only 1 week left in July. Anyway, I'm always wondering what you're doing when you're listening to this show. Are you getting ready for your day? Are you working out? Are you driving? Are you listening while you're at work? Wherever you are right this minute, I want to say thank you for listening and thank you for allowing me to be part of your day for 20 or so minutes. It means a lot to me. And you know what else would mean a lot to me? If you went over to iTunes or Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcasts and leave a review for the show and why this show means something to you. It'll help other people just like you find the show. It helps me spread the word, and you guys get to express yourself and say thanks as well. So, this week, I want to talk about coping mechanisms. And this is actually something I've been meaning to cover for a while. What do I mean by coping mechanisms? Well, it's any action that you take to help you deal with your emotions, and that's coping. And you might think coping is really something that you have to do when you're in a situation that you might have to cope with somebody else's behavior. But in fact, the dictionary definition is to deal effectively with something difficult. But actually, those things, situations, people's behaviors are simply circumstances in your life. They are neutral and are only difficult if you believe they are, right? Go back and listen to my podcast on circumstances. They're just there. And then we have thoughts about them, and those thoughts create feelings. And that's where the coping comes in with those feelings. Because most of us, myself included, don't really like uncomfortable emotions. And we just sort of want to get away from them, resist them, avoid them. And we want to do that as fast as possible. So, for example, if you had a disagreement with your partner, and if you are like most couples, it's a disagreement that you've had at least once before. So that is your circumstance. You said words at this time with this person, and you may have some thoughts about it, like, if I have to explain myself one more time, I'm going to lose it. And when you think that thought, you have some feelings. And chances are they're not warm and fuzzy feelings. They are sharp, stabby, angry feelings. And those feelings don't feel good. And a lot of times our first instinct is to try and fix it so you don't have to feel them anymore, right? Because they don't feel good. And that's what I mean by coping mechanisms. These are actions that we take to avoid feeling something uncomfortable. It might be drinking a glass of wine, or eating a cupcake, or going for a run, or scrolling through social media, shopping on Amazon, even reading a book. And I like to call these things buffers, because what you're really doing is putting a buffer, like a cushion or a shield, between yourself and your uncomfortable emotions. It's a way of shielding or guarding ourselves from the emotion, or that's what we think it is. And as I'm talking about this, you might be recognizing that, hey, that sounds a lot like procrastination, and it definitely can be. And for my high achievers out there, I see you. You might even be listening to this podcast to, quote, learn something. Meanwhile, you're actually avoiding working on something new that you're uncomfortable with, you think you need more information on. So you're essentially avoiding, procrastinating, and yes, buffering away the discomfort of putting yourself out there by listening to this podcast instead. So I spent a lot of my life in the fitness world, teaching classes, training others, working out, and this is also a place where there can be a lot of buffering. Working out can absolutely get rid of negativity and emotions, and it's often called the ultimate stress buster. And that's true to an extent. The problem is when you're done running or lifting or working out and all those endorphins fade away, you're still kind of left with those same old thoughts that caused the feelings in the first place. So working out is a temporary fix. It's just like wine or chocolate or online shopping. It just happens to be better for your body. So trust me, I've tried all of these buffers. But buffering, which is the act of using a buffer to distance yourself from your emotions, is a temporary solution. And buffers have consequences, like feeling gross after drinking a bottle of wine to forget your problems from the night, or you have a huge credit card bill, or you have to stay up late to get work done because you were scrolling on your phone instead of doing what you needed to do. So if you're scrolling on your phone or your computer instead of getting work done, and then you're up until midnight to kind of catch up so that you're not behind the next day, that is classic buffering. Now, if you think about working out as a buffer, you might say, hey, working out to avoid my emotions has no negative consequences. And I will agree that working out is a beneficial activity for sure. It's so good for you, builds bone density and cardiovascular, all that kind of stuff. But and it may not have consequences like feeling gross the next day, like with a hangover or overspending outside of your budget. But here's the deal, the result of not finding a way to handle your emotions aside from that buffer means that if the buffer is taken away, you're in trouble. And so, if that's the only way that you know to de stress is to go out for a run or lift or whatever, and suddenly you're injured and you can't do it, what are you going to do? You're in trouble. And I've seen this happen to a lot of people. Their coping mechanism is taken away and they like lose their mind. They're angry all the time. They're frustrated. They're complaining. Nobody wants to be around them. And then they're reaching out for other buffers because the preferred buffer is gone. And they're saying it's because they can't work out that they're overeating, or it's because they can't move like they usually do that they're over drinking. And they say that the reason that they feel so stressed is because they can't run to burn off the crazy. And I would offer it's because you haven't learned how to manage your thinking, so you don't have as much of that crazy to burn off in the first place. Now, I'm not saying you should never ever drink wine or eat chocolate or go online shopping or even go for a walk or a run when you're upset. We're all going to do that sometimes. But I want you to know, just be really, really aware that buffers do not help you. They mask the issue. And that issue is going to be there again as soon as the endorphins fade, as soon as the cupcakes are eaten, as soon as the Amazon order is placed. Because, hey, online shopping is a buffer until you hit the buy button, and then the buffer's gone. And then by the time the package arrives, you maybe have lost interest in it or you're excited about it and you open the package and then it's like, right? So as a buffer, online shopping is terrible. But what happens after those buffers are gone? After the endorphins are gone, the sugar rush is gone, that momentary hit of pleasure that you felt that rush of dopamine and the endorphins, and it feels really good in the moment. And then once it wears off, you're right back to where you started because you are still thinking the crappy thoughts that made you feel crappy emotions in the first place. I had a client who cleaned whenever she had negative emotions like anger, sadness, frustration. So her house was often dust and clutter free. And a lot of people would say, that's a really good thing. I'd love to have a clean house all the time. But again, in this case, it was simply a distraction. It's avoiding the uncomfortable feelings. So I want you to take a moment right now and really think about all the buffers that you have in your life. What would you be left with if you could no longer pursue those activities? If you could no longer scroll through your phone when you're bored? No more binge watching Netflix or eating sugar when you're lonely? No more chips and salsa or wine when you're feeling stressed out? No more housework when you're irritated and need to have a hard conversation? No more online shopping when you're avoiding work? No more coffee when you're feeling exhausted, because yes, coffee can really be a buffer, caffeine in general. All of those, plus reading, listening to podcasts, watching porn, playing video games, messaging friends can be buffers. Anything that you're using to distract. Imagine your life without those things and what it would look like. What do you think your prevailing emotions would be if you took all of those buffers away? Would it be frustration or stress or loneliness or anger? So, really think about it. If you couldn't do all of those things that you do to manage your emotions on a daily basis, where would you be? And I want you to understand this. This is sort of like the big aha takeaway right now. These emotions are always there. They're not going away. You're just working really hard to ignore and avoid them by managing them with your actions. These emotions are not just happening to you. They're not like rain falling out of the sky. Nobody is making you feel that way. They are coming from your thoughts. They are coming from within you by how you are thinking about yourself, about other people, about the circumstances, your job, your marriage, your house, your bank account, your weight. None of those circumstances create your emotions. You create those emotions by what you think about those things, by the meaning that you give them. So those things are not your problem. Your problem is the way you are thinking about them. And that thinking creates your emotions, and then the emotions, if you don't like them and you're trying to avoid them, that's where the buffering comes in. And, I'll offer to you buffers are expensive. They can be expensive financially, physically, emotionally. They can ruin your health, your bank account, and your relationships if they get taken too far. And again, that's the definition of a buffer versus a hobby. If you are doing it at the expense of something else, that there's a negative consequence that can come with it, even if that's just feeling your feelings. Think about somebody who gets addicted to some kind of drug because they need to escape from their life, and that drug ends up destroying their life. That's a buffer, right? It's an extreme example. And online shopping is a buffer in that same way. It's just more socially acceptable. Now, I know most of you probably do not buffer to the point of financial ruin or destroying your health or your relationships. But I suspect that there are things in your life that you wish were just a little bit better. Maybe you'd like to just have more of a cushion in your bank account, or have more energy, lose some weight, have a better relationship with someone. And all of those things are results that you want. And you think, if I get that result, I'll feel better. But remember, that's not how it works. The results that you want come from actions, like saving money instead of spending it, or going to bed earlier instead of lying in bed for 3 hours scrolling videos or even reading a book. They come from the action of connecting and spending quality time with your spouse instead of sitting on the opposite ends of the couch with your faces in your phones. So, those actions that you take to create the result of having more connection or losing weight or having more money, those actions can't happen when you're buffering. Buffering is the opposite of those actions. Those actions happen when you have the emotion of determination or motivation or calm or love or confidence. Those kind of emotions drive action that gives you the results that you want. Emotions like anger and loneliness drive you to buffer. Buffering is you running away from those feelings, taking actions to disconnect from them. And those buffers become habits because they're easy. The reason buffers work so well is because they're actions that give your brain a hit of dopamine in the moment and sort of flush away negative feelings. And so the things that are really addictive, like alcohol, caffeine, sugar, drugs, like online shopping, like your phone, those things become buffers for us because they're easy. They give us a quick hit of pleasure. And hey, we're humans. We like pleasure. We're pleasure seeking creatures. And then they become habitual. But the problem is that shopping online does not make you any less lonely. If anything, it might make you more lonely because then you have less money and time to go out and do things that you actually want to do with other humans. So, what are you supposed to do? And like I say every week in this podcast, your thinking is the key to everything. Believing your boss is a jerk can make you feel angry. The problem is not your boss. It's your thoughts about your boss. And since you cannot punch your boss in the face, you have to find another way to handle that anger. And if you're thinking that my boss is such a jerk and he drives me to drink, and hey, we've all had crappy bosses or coworkers, right? I have too. But no, your boss doesn't drive you to drink. Your boss doesn't drive you to think that he's a jerk. You're driving yourself to think that and do that because that thought, my boss is a jerk, is a thought. It's an opinion. It's never ever factual. There's no upside to believing thoughts like my boss is a jerk. It makes you angry. You don't want to deal with your feelings and then you buffer. And I'm not saying you need to just start believing your boss is an angel. But for sure, you can stop repeating in your mind that this person is a jerk or something else negative that makes you have a negative emotion. How about I have a boss who does things that I don't agree with? That's something that you can believe, right? And that's way calmer than my boss is a jerk. So, you guys, watch your thinking and ask yourself these two questions. Does believing this thought help me? Is believing this thought advantageous to me? Believing your boss is a jerk has no upside to it whatsoever, even if it's true. It's a useless, wasted thought. So watch your thinking. When you have this desire to buffer, what are you thinking? And ask yourself, does believing this thought help me? So ask yourself, does believing this thought help me? Usually the answer is no. Okay. But also, what am I trying to avoid? If it's avoiding a feeling, then you need to work on thinking differently and also dealing with those negative emotions. All right. But that I'm not talking about that on this podcast. Okay. So it's not just work. We do this to ourselves with not being enough or being too much. We do this in relationships. We label people and we blame them. But here's the other thing about buffers. We get them linked in our mind to certain situations. Okay, so like your boss is going to say something you don't like, and it starts out with you thinking, this guy is a jerk. I'm going to go home and have a drink. But then eventually it becomes your boss does something you don't like, and you immediately think, I'm going to go to happy hour tonight, or I'm just going to pour a big glass of wine at home. And you cut out the middle part. In another scenario, your kid maybe throws a tantrum and your immediate thought is like, I'm going to go hide in the bathroom so I can get some peace for 5 minutes. And these become like a Pavlovian response. Something happens, it's a circumstance, and you find yourself taking an action, and it almost seems like the thought and the feeling aren't even there because it's just automatic. But the thought and feeling are there. You have just automated your brain because you had that circumstance, thought, feeling, action cycle happen so much that your brain is like, oh, we do this a lot. Let me automate it. I want to be efficient. We don't have to waste any more brain energy on it. So you stop having conscious thoughts about those things after a while. And it just seems like the situation is causing the behavior. So I'm inviting you for this to be your wake up call right here today. I want you to make a list of all your buffers and when and why you use them. And then the next time you want to eat Cheetos or scroll Instagram when you're bored or whatever it is, stop and pause. Ask yourself, what problem am I trying to solve with this activity? And what feeling am I trying to avoid? And those questions are everything. What problem am I trying to solve with this activity? And what feeling am I trying to avoid? Because if the problem is stress, food and alcohol and online shopping are not the answer. Food does not fix stress in the long term. It might fix your stress for a couple minutes, but then you're stressed because you overate. Alcohol might fix it, but then you're stressed the next day or you just feel gross. It doesn't fix it. So food and alcohol and online shopping, online anything are not the answer to stress. Food is the answer to hunger. That's it. Online shopping is the answer to, oh, look, I'm out of dog treats, or I need a new dress to wear to this wedding. Again, if the problem is loneliness, food, alcohol, online shopping, any action to distract yourself is not the answer. So once you can clearly see the problem that you're trying to solve, the emotions you're trying to avoid, you have to find a solution that fits the problem, not a solution that gets in between you and your emotions. Okay, and here's where we're back to our thoughts. So I hope this gave you something new to think about and to consider and a way to grow and evolve emotionally. Thank you for listening. And if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with someone or even just post it in your stories for others to find as well. Have a great week, and I will be back next week with another episode of Stop Overthinking. Thank you for listening to the Stop Overthinking podcast with Kristen Odegaard. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with someone else who would benefit from the message. To learn more about working with me and links to social media and free resources, head over to my website, coachwithkristen.com. That's Kristen spelled Kristen. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss future episodes. Have a great week.